Welcome to West Virginia and Commonplace. Today, this is an amazing thing. Almost a year ago to this date, I had Margaret O'Connor on the show, and she was talking about her first book. And Margaret has returned to talk to us about her latest book. So I'm going to hand it forward to Margaret real quick. Margaret, can you tell everybody how you've been through all this and what sparked the second book?
Oh, certainly, JR. Thank God I've been very healthy, no major concerns that wise. But what really sparked the second book is, believe it or not, this actually was my first book that I was writing, and something amazing happened. Um, I started getting thoughts in my mind: woman priest, woman's ordination. And okay, well, literally, they kept coming and coming, and so much so that I thought this is a major distraction. So I completely stopped writing the book that we'll be talking about today and went on with my other book, Scandal in the Shadows. So that was pretty unique. I've never had anything like that before happen.
Okay, so kind of like, yeah, that's weird, and not weird, but it's strange. Like, you started your first book, and that was your strong feeling, and then your second book becomes your first book, and now your
Yes.
first book is your second book.
Will confuse the listeners.
Yeah, confuse them a little bit. Now, the title of this book, Journey of a Celiac Soul. Could you explain this title to the audience? Because some of our audience is well informed, and some of them are not informed to the nature of that title.
Oh, sure. The word celiac, that's basically underlies this whole book. It's an autoimmune disease. And basically, what that means is that you are no longer to eat any foods that contain wheat, rye, barley, or oats, if those oats aren't grown on a field separate from your other, like wheaten grains. And what happens is, think of when you eat any type of your regular everyday foods, breakfast foods, lunch, dinner. Obviously, they contain wheat. For some reason, for people with celiac disease, when that hits your intestinal area, the body is like on alert and they're going to fight. They see that wheat, that grain is an invader, and they end up attacking your own intestinal wall. So Dr. Tom O'Brien, he really gave you an excellent visualization on this. Think of the inside of your track as being lined with shag carpeting. So normally, if you eat something with that has B12 in it, that shag in one side will take out the B12 vitamins. You eat iron, a food with iron in it, another shag will take the iron, and no matter whether it's proteins or good fats, your body, your intestine, it looks almost like mountains and valleys. And there's these little wavy projections called villi, and they're there to take in the value, the vitamins, the minerals, the proteins from your food. But with the damage done by the wheat coming in your own body attacking it, it's almost like sandpaper. They completely remove those projections. So you can eat and eat food, and yet you are taking in no value. So basically, what's happening is you have a medical disease that's causing starvation in your body. And that is no fun way to lose weight. And that's why people, and I can understand why they hear diet. So what do you think of right away? You think of weight loss. Well, yes, ours is a diet, but it's not to lose weight. It's to keep our weight on. Because if we ingest any wheaten foods, we lose great amounts of weight. And again, nothing is being absorbed. So you're constantly tired. Oh, it's just an awful fatigue. You're losing great amounts of weight. You either have awful constipation or diarrhea, Anemia was my companion. Unfortunately, it was always there. And it's just a lousy feeling. You have like stomach, intestinal pain. I won't get into the nitty gritty of it, but it's bad. And that's why if you're living with a disease like this, going through your life every day with these symptoms, and then here you hear the world is looking at this as like a fad diet, there's an awful disconnect there.
Oh wow. Well, let me ask you this. So, how did this become like a fad diet? Like, who determined
Oh,
that having a disease,
well,
kind
actually, yeah, actually, the big movie stars, some tennis players, they got on this diet, and they were basically saying how good they felt. Now, maybe they had some type of sensitivity themselves to wheat. But anyway, so when it's like anything, you're seeing all these big stars and they're raving about this diet. But the funny part is, well, it's not funny if we have to, eat this food that it's gluten free, is that it has more sugar in it. It has more fats in it. It doesn't have all the protein that your normal foods have. But so many people basically got on this sort of a bandwagon. And you know how it was just such a big craze. You'd look anywhere and all of a sudden you'd see gluten-free foods, this gluten-free. And for those of us with celiac disease, in a sense, it was an awful godsend because finally you had the major big companies, whether it was like General Mills or Post, any of the big cereal companies, they could see the money. So they immediately got on this bandwagon. But, and for those of us with this disease, thank God now you can have bread that doesn't fall apart literally. You can have food that, the quality of the food tastes so much better.
okay. Now, how does this tie into the Catholic religion?
Oh, yes. We've just been talking about celiac disease in regards to one's own physical body, their health.
Yes.
Okay, well, when you think of wheat, um, that wheaten grain had followed me into my church, literally right up on the church altar in the form of the communion host. Your communion host has wheat in it. And I was diagnosed back in 1986. And at the time, the Catholic Church only had one communion host. And again, that was wheaten. About 18 years later, they came out with a low gluten host. And predominantly, people with celiac disease have no problem with that. But there are other Catholics, such as myself, that have celiac disease. And when we ingest that host, we do have problems. And we're almost like the invisible Catholics. And unless I had a priest that would allow me to use a gluten-free food, in other words, if you're going to carry like communion, the priest carries it, the Eucharistic ministers, they carry communion to the sick in this like little metal container. And I bought one of those and then I put my gluten-free food on that and actually set it on the altar. And then the priest during the consecration, as he would normally, um, do the blessings and say the prayers over the regular communion host, my pyx is up there on the altar. But canon law, that's church law. And that law explicitly says that the communion host has to have so much wheat in it. And that's the major problem because my food that I put up on the altar in that pyx does not have wheat in it. And that's where the Catholic Church says, unfortunately, no, we can't, that isn't communion. But if I can just be the devil's advocate,
Okay.
okay, again, my pyx is up there on the altar near where the regular, hosts are. The priest is saying the prayers of the consecration. So the priest is standing in, obviously, for Jesus. But who's actually making that change in the matter to Jesus's body? That's Jesus. And that's what he's doing. So my communion pyx is either Jesus is going to say, fine, this is allowed, or he's going to say, no, this isn't allowed. So really, from that perspective, what is the problem?
Okay. So basically the church doesn't want to conform, no type of conformity can be made under the laws that are written for you to actually have access to your communion.
Yes, and unless I can find a priest that allows that, which I had for several years, and then a new associate priest came in, and this was last December, or 2 years ago, rather, and he said, Peg, I have to talk to you. And I said, all right. And he said, we have to go outside. And I said, what? This was, in December. So we get outside and he says, Peg, I no longer can give you your communion. So
Whoa.
I said, well, why, Father? I said, who's telling you that you can't do this? And there was silence. And then he went on and no. And he says, I don't know you. And I said, Father, you've only been giving me communion now about 5 or 6 months. And I said, who is telling you that you can't give me this? And I was getting nowhere with him. And I was really afraid. So I said, all right, Father, I'm ending this conversation now before I say something. So I went back in the church and I took my pyx off the altar and left. But I did call him that following Monday, and he called me back on Tuesday. And I said, Father, let's cut to the chase. I said, what is going on here? And again, he's hemming and hawing, and he wouldn't say anything. And I said, Father, this is my spiritual life. This is my Eucharist. And you're telling me that I can't receive this? I said, I demand to know now who has put you up to this. And then finally he said, well, it's me. And I said, what? I said, why are you doing this? And then he went on to say that he was breaking church law, canon law, which, by the way, is man-made law. This is not Jesus's law. And I said, all right, let me try to understand this. And then he also said after, he was breaking the church law, he said, I just can't go on doing this. My conscience just, it's awful. And that's why I have to stop giving you communion. So I said, all right, let me try to understand this. You're going to leave me out here swinging in the wind without communion. And yet your conscience is going to be fine and dandy. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, you can receive the cup. I have personally seen this happen twice. If you don't have a separate communion cup that is away from the other communion cups, a lot of times right before communion, if the priest has extra wine in his chalice, he will actually pour it in some of the other communion cups there that are distributed. Well, right away, that's contamination because there's what's called commingling during the Mass, and the priest breaks particles of the host into the chalice. So I wasn't in agreement with that. And he also wanted to give me musk. And I said, we're going to run into the same situation as has happened with the communion cup, where either he forgets and pours it in, or another Eucharistic minister sees a cup that's out, which was my cup, which was out from the other cups, and then puts it right at the front, would be like the first cup. So I went 20 years undiagnosed, and I was sick every day. And I said, Father, no, those other options are not viable for me. So anyway, that's where I stand now. That I haven't got communion and received communion in 2 years.
And that's crazy that your own pastor, I could see if it was something higher up the chain that they decided to bring down into your church, but the pastor just decided personal preference. It's not anything. It's not even religious. It's just personal preference.
Oh, well, actually, this was the associate pastor, and then that's even more puzzling, JR, because then I did go to my pastor. And I said, and he says, oh, I know what he wanted to discuss with you. And believe it or not, there's actually a canon law that says that if there's any like important pronouncement that has to be made, it's the pastor that should do it. But anyway, when I said, I explained what he said and why. And I said, I grew up back in the 1950s, and a pastor, he was the person that was in charge. And associate priests would never, ever do anything like this. And I said, Father Brian, what are you going to do about this? And he looks at me, well, Peg, I talked to him. I talked to him several times. And I said, so in other words, you're not going to do anything. And he just turned right away. He turned his back to me and walked away. So it's very disheartening, to say the least.
Yeah, I was about to interject it. I was about to say it's really disheartening because that's your priest and your associate priest, and it doesn't matter the religion. We can take that back over to mine, which is Baptist. The associate pastor has some say so, but everything, like you said, and it doesn't matter what it is inside Christianity. Your main pastor handles everything. He's the final law on what goes on in that church. Besides
Definitely.
your boards and different things that work with him inside the church functions. So my question to you is how did it make you feel when you left the church? Initially, you leave the church, you hop in your car, you go home, and all this trust that you built with this pastor over all this time, the associate pastor, not so worried about his feelings because obviously there's a discord there. But how did it make you feel when this pastor turned his back on you, per se?
It was just sickening. And then in my mind, I'm trying to reason, and especially coming from a priest of all people, that's
Yes.
just like a double-edged sword. Trying to understand where he's coming from. I can't even put it in the right words, but in my last book, we had gone into about the church had lied, the betrayal of trust. That's the term I guess I'm using. Where there were women priests and they say, no, there aren't. Well, this was just an awful betrayal of trust that, I mean, here you're supposed to, you're a good Catholic, or I don't care what the religion is, you're a good Lutheran, a Methodist. You go to church and, obviously that's the highlight of the Mass, and it's the highlight of your own spiritual being, literally, is, you're just bonded with the Eucharist. And to have something like this happen, I was, I guess, shell shocked. I mean, I first of all, I just couldn't believe that something like this would ever happen. And then when it did happen, I got home and did this really just happen? Um,
And I mean, basically, to me, it feels like when you're being devout, you shouldn't be destroyed for being devout, and you're devout in your faith, and someone just tries to break it with their own personal intuition. That's always been my major issue, even, with being a Baptist Christian out of Virginia. Um, it always seemed like the man-made, or I just say this, the human intuition that is brought into religion always finds itself on your front porch doing something disastrous to your home. And it's crazy that, you've gone to this church all this time, and you build up a rapport. These are people you know in your community. Your priest is considered not necessarily your middleman, but it's a communicator to God in your religion, correct?
Oh, definitely.
So how can you put faith back in this man that just turned away, just treated you like you were invisible? So in that instance, you had to make a choice, either risk your health, or choose your religion. So what did you decide to do? Obviously you're alive, so we know you chose something. So
Well, there's one more. This is, if you think what I've just told you is unbelievable. I went to the bishop,
whoa.
and then this was even more sickening. I related my experience, what had happened with the associate pastor. And I guess I shouldn't have said that I felt that he no longer should be a priest. That I don't think that went,
Oh.
it went very well. But I mean, I can't help it. This is so personal, So he looked at me and he said, "Well, Peg, you better pray and pray and pray that God hears your prayers." So in other words, he was being very dismissive of me. He had no intention of trying to solve this problem. He had his own agenda, and that agenda certainly was not to help me.
Yeah, it seems like it was more to just pacify, like not even to help you, like not even to think about the situation. And that seems like that's a common theme on the controversial stuff inside being a Catholic. So I know with you, you were a person, you were what we call an investigator. So you do research. Were there any instances as you were writing this book and all that you found more information, obviously, that went along with your story?
No, but it really, well, what I want to add is I forgot this book. It's not only about my own personal, experiences,
Hmm.
whether physically or with the church. It's for anyone that wants to themselves really examine this Eucharistic sacrament. So many times we take things for granted. The Eucharist is always going to be there. And today, it's not only my access issue, it's an access issue to any other Catholic in our church due to the awful priest shortage. And many Catholics now, finally in our area, it's starting, like out in the rural areas, it's starting to be very apparent. And it's going to be here really quicker than anyone realizes. But then again, JR, that brings up a whole other issue. We know from the research that I found in my other book that there were women priests, bishops, and deacons. Who better to help, in a sense, begin to shore up this awful priest hemorrhage than bringing back this tradition of woman priest back into our church? And of all times, we certainly need that.
And could you go into a little bit of detail of why there is a current priest shortage in the Catholic Church? Beyond the obvious things, not necessarily. I'm not necessarily talking about the scandals and stuff like that, but why is there a shortage?
Well, it started, believe it or not, back in the 1970s. The church had done surveys and they could see back then that the numbers of, young men entering the seminary, the priesthood, uh, were starting to fall off. And a lot of people will say that one of the reasons is the celibacy issue, which, of course, for any young man going into the priesthood, that's one of the main things. They have to be celibate. And of course, as our society changes, um, that can be a very major issue, your own human sexuality. And it's basically has to be put on the back burner if you're going to be a priest. So that was one issue that they said was starting to, affect. And then I think just the other rulings within the Catholic Church, whether it be on controversial issues, maybe these priests felt a different way, and even within their own conscience, they were upset. So they started to leave the priesthood. But the major issue is the priest sexual abuse. And of course, the hierarchy will try to gloss over this. But if you're a parent and you have young children, I know this from my cousins, they did not want their boys to be altar boys anymore. They were afraid. I mean, what is going on? And this is awful to say because there were young boys that were molested in the sacristy, and that's the area right off of the church, or the church altar area. But that fear of, is that priest? Is he one of those? You know what I'm saying? But then again, the whole role model of being a priest used to be looked at as such a special endeavor if you were Catholic. And there was a certain honor there, like for a family that, their son was a priest, a bishop, or, the few that go on to be cardinals. But that has been devastated too. And you put like all these different components together, and this has kept men from joining to be a priest.
And then also the churches not including females as priests and things like they did in the past. I can almost figure that that's a big thing there. Now, let me ask you this on the position of from the last book. Have there been any changes that you have noticed in the Catholic Church to kind of give women more rights in the pastoral positions or deacons?
No. Everything is status quo. And this is what I just can't understand, how this hierarchy, they basically, from the 70s, they could see the numbers had gone down of men entering the priesthood. And what did they do? Nothing until they had to do something. And what they devised, JR, it's called a communion service. Instead of having the Mass, or what is now known as the liturgy of the Eucharist, you have consecrated hosts from a previous liturgy that would be available at this communion service. And you would have a deacon or a Eucharistic minister presiding and saying some prayers, and then doing readings, and then distributing the Eucharist. But of all things that they have to affect, but that was because they did nothing. And yet the writing now is on the wall. They know it is on the wall. They finally had to do something with that communion service. And another reason, again, you said, what is the awful, the priest shortage? Numbers they're double, triple, because the remaining priests that are left, they are now predominantly all in their 70s, in their 80s or upwards. And of course, I mean, anyone that reaches those ages, somewhere within the next, few decades, you die off, and that's what's happening. And there's such a great number of them that are, dying off. And who is there to replace them? No one.
And obviously, like you said, if they knew this from the 70s to now, um, that's a good long time to have started some kind of advocacy to gain more priests and to bring um, females into the persuasion. And obviously, that did not happen. So let's dive a little bit into this book. All right, we touched on the topics of the celiac disease. We touched on the priest shortage. Inside this book, what kind of self-care did you do for yourself when you were writing this one?
What do you mean?
Like, well, when you write things to inform people, but at the same time, you write things for self-care. Like the incident that you went through with your pastor and your associate pastor. How did you get closure in that matter, or did you not get closure in that matter?
Oh no, I have no closure in that matter. It's like an open wound. And then when I started writing this book, I didn't dare go to another priest that is open, because I just didn't want them to get in trouble, because I know now that this book is out. I've basically aired the dirty laundry that uh, I was getting communion, and that would put the priest in trouble. And I am not about to put any priest in trouble. So I didn't even broach that topic with another open-minded priest.
Okay, and in writing both these books didn't garner you any type of excommunication or anything from the church, did they?
No, they didn't.
And how, at least from the first book, how from that book did your priest and your associate priest take these books in? Like, how did they
Oh,
accept them?
they don't even know they exist, because I've never talked to them
Oh wow.
since that incident. Yeah. And then I've just been going to other Catholic masses, not receiving communion at other churches.
But just still keeping yourself in a place of worship. And I definitely respect that, because like you said, if someone doesn't have your better interest, then sometimes you do have to walk away from the people, and especially someone that's supposed to be of a higher power. I'm not going to say necessarily a deity or anything like that, but someone that's supposed to be the medium between you and God shuts you out. That 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 happening, and the same thing with the female priest and the female exclusion from the Catholic religion to a degree. And
Yeah,
uh,
it's a real double whammy.
yeah, because it's like you want to do right, but then you can't because someone won't allow you to. They actually, they're about like when you go to a family function, you have that one set of uncles and aunts that doesn't talk about the family secrets, and then you have those that do, and the ones that don't are the ones that keep it silent forever, and you never hear anything about it. So, your second book, which is your first book, Journey of a Celiac Soul. Where can we find this book? And what is the major message that you would put out on a billboard if you posted a billboard about this book?
Oh, there's so many avenues. Be grateful for your opportunity to receive the Eucharist.
Okay, and I can go with that one.
Oh, could I add
Now,
one more thing?
yes, ma'am. Keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to an aspect of what about celiac disease, because there's so many uh, Catholics that have this disease, and whether it's an immediate family member or even friends, relatives, they can't see the seriousness of why just a little gluten isn't going to hurt you. And Dr. Oz said 1/8 of a teaspoon is all that someone like with celiac disease needs to get awfully sick. And again, just getting back to what a change, what a loss this is in your life. We all have that awful loss of a loved one. We lose a job, if we're, in a divorce. But with celiac disease, your loss is from the perspective of your everyday food. And I remember when I got the phone call, I was sitting in my kitchen table, and the doctor thought he knew what I had, and he wanted me to go and get another test done, and then he would know definitely. But it was what he said afterwards. He said, if this is what I think it is, your whole food regimen is going to be forever changed. You are never going to be able to eat the foods, so many of the foods that you're eating right now. And his last sentence was, you will never, ever again be able to eat your favorite cookies. Well, I put the phone down, and yes, I was shell shocked to say the least. And I remember looking over at a kitchen cabinet, and I could see like the Duncan Hines brownie mix, Duncan Hines chocolate cake mix, and whatever else. And all of a sudden, what his words, the way they hit me, it was fear. And I remember going down in the basement. We had, oh my God, we had 8 or 10 boxes of the Girl Scout mint cookies.
The Thin Mints, yes, ma'am.
Yes. And remembering that I can eat and eat and eat because nothing's being absorbed, I grabbed about at least 8 boxes and brought them upstairs and immediately devoured them, because that's how this hit me, that I'll never, ever again be able to eat my regular foods. Now, someone else, it'll hit them another way. But why is it so important that we accept this reality, that we really experience this grief? Because if you're in denial, it's serious, because this Dr. Alessio Fasano said, the gluten-free diet is like insulin for diabetics. And if you have celiac disease and you don't go on a gluten-free diet, you die slowly, but you die. And this is a man, thank God, this doctor came from Italy. He was a pediatric gastroenterologist. He saw about 15 to 20 children every week, diagnosed with celiac disease. So he comes over here first to the University of Maryland, and okay, weeks went by, months went by, a year went by, and he wrote this book, Where Are All the American Celiacs? He had no one to work with. So he got a sample from the Red Cross, and there he found several cases of celiac disease, but because of the confidentiality, he had no name. So, he couldn't alert these people. But I'll tell you, Italy, if you're a child or an adult and you're diagnosed with celiac disease, from the time you have symptoms until the diagnosis, it's only 2 or 3 weeks. Run that same scenario over here in the US, and you're talking 10 years. I went 20 years, and when the doctor got the final results back, he said, you're a very lucky woman. He said, within 6 months, you would have been down 6 feet in the grave. So I'm just saying this, we as celiacs, we don't want sympathy, but the waiter, their truth on what we ask about how the food is prepared, the chef, the restaurant owner, it's the cross-contamination issue. Okay, say the waiter says, yes, we have gluten-free pasta. All right, now, is that your dish of gluten-free pasta, is that being cooked in a separate pan of fresh water? Or are they throwing that gluten-free pasta in the pan that just had wheaten pasta in it? What about the colander? Was that just used for a wheaten pasta order? What about the ladle to spoon out the sauce? Was that just used over wheaten noodles? And then what about the meatballs? Were they breaded with wheaten flour? I'm just trying to say there's so many ways that contamination can occur. And we look forward, when we go out, we want to try to pretend like it used to be. You would just go to a restaurant now. If it's in the breakfast, gee, maybe I have a hankering for French toast. Yes, we can make that French toast back at home with gluten-free flours. But if we're at a restaurant predominantly, that's completely out. Your waffles, your pancakes, your English muffins, your bagels, any of the breads there, they're all wheaten. And then your soups, you have to know what's in the base for that. What about the gravies, the flour used for that? I mean, I can go on and on, but I'm just doing this so that the waiters understand the seriousness of this. If they think it's just a fad diet, oh, add a little gluten, that's not going to hurt you. And I'm very lucky I didn't come down with cancer, but there's been other Catholic celiacs that went beyond 20 years, and they did come down with cancer.
All from the outside world having a lack of knowledge. Because like you said, in food preparation, even going into that much detail, I didn't know that there was that much that went into being a celiac and making sure that you truly are cooking and eating gluten-free.
Yeah, as much as definitely, because it's not only that people can say, oh, well, here, there's wheat pasta, we'll cook you up, whatever. No. And then even, I better not use it. It's one of the major, a big like breakfast chain. I heard the most ridiculous thing that they were putting flour into the egg mixture to make it the eggs look more fluffy. Well, here you think, well, how can they, I would normally say, could you just in a separate pan put my egg? Because if it's on like a big griddle area, you don't want that, because what was just on there? Did they just have regular pancakes? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Or whatever. So, but to hear that one where they put flour into the eggs, that just blew my mind.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's kind of like putting the eggs on steroids to pump them up a little bit. So, along with being with this gluten-free diet, does this carry over into sodas and different things like that, or pop?
I personally don't. I don't drink pop because of the carbonation. I'll leave it at that. But you have to be watch out for your like certain liquors, beer and that, because of the malt.
Yes.
So that's a whole other issue. And then even instant coffee can have fillers in it. Oh, here's a good illustration. We have a grocery store, Wegmans.
Yes, we have those. Or in
And
Virginia, we do.
oh, great. I love it because, they have everything labeled like gluten-free, lactose, and I also have a lactose problem. So their coffee, oh my God, the little things that you put in the
Creamer?
K-cups.
Okay, cups. Okay.
Okay, they're gluten-free. Now, all K-cups aren't gluten-free. We have like Tim Hortons coffee shop. And if you go in their store, the coffee that's served there is gluten-free, but their K-cups are not gluten-free. So that's a whole other hidden area. You just can't grab a K-cup and assume that it's gluten-free.
Okay. So you have to be real careful
Oh, medications too. That's
with
another.
medication. Whoa.
Yeah. And this was really upsetting. It took forever to finally get that new labeling that they finally included wheat in like one of the major components. It's the restaurant industry that labels it as an allergy. Because people would say, well, how can you call celiac disease? You're calling it an autoimmune disease, and they're saying it's an allergy. But anyway, that's how that's labeled. And when that law was passed, they did not include medications, and it's specifically in the starch of a medication where the gluten would be. So then you will call a drug company and you will ask them, is this gluten-free? Oh, well, ma'am, no, we can't say it's, he listed it. Oh, yeah, it says gluten-free. And I said, so you're telling me that there's no gluten at all in this? Oh, well, ma'am, we can't say it's gluten-free because we really don't know. Well, then why are you listing it as gluten-free? So then again, you get people like that work at, not everyone, but you know what I mean, that they see this as like a fad diet and they just sort of gloss it over. But I get my medication at Wegmans and I have them contact these pharmacies because they're very good that way to be sure, that the medicine I'm getting is gluten-free.
Okay, so you do have a mode and a method to what you got going on. Well, Margaret, I want to thank you for coming on West Virginia and Commonplace. It's been a great pleasure having you back on for a second time. And I hope in another year you have another book coming out that lets people outside of the Catholic religion know more about what goes on behind the scenes, the stuff that you don't hear about on the news. Like something like this and something like your first book should have been something that it should have been on 2020, 60 Minutes. These things should be more highlighted, inside society.
Yes, definitely.
And one more time, just one thing that we do on the show, the shameless plug. Could you please tell everybody where they can get both your books and how they can get in contact with you?
Yes, my first book was Scandal in the Shadows, The Original Priest, Mother Mary. That's right. Jesus's mother was a woman priest. That's at Amazon. And my latest book, Journey of a Celiac Soul, A Second Chance at Life, that's as well at Amazon. And if you go over to yourradicaltruth.com, yourradicaltruth.com, you will see as you go across the menu, there's a contact on the heading there.
Okay, and once again, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And you're an amazing person. And I give everybody a testament. That's something I do nowadays, not in the biblical sense. But here's the thing, Margaret O'Connor. It takes a lot to step away from your religion. Religion is part of our morality. It's basically our institute of thought to a degree, and to have to sometimes remove yourself from it in certain instances. We were taught as children not to speak up and be very loud in the church. Opinions are, and it doesn't matter the religion, opinions are something that don't hold very much merit in the church, no matter the religion. But you yourself, you stepped up, you've seen some things, and obviously you had a physical disease that is taken over. With the celiac disease, and you decided to take a stand. You went to your priest, you're in your associate priest, then your priest, and you try to get a resolve there. Didn't get it there. Went to the bishop. The bishop thought otherwise, and then you decided to do what would work for you and not cause harm to anyone else. You continued to go to church, various churches, but you stayed strong in your faith, and that's one thing that's great there. but at the same time, you took care of yourself. You made sure that you were staying healthy by not taking the communion anymore. So what I want to say to you is this: I really, really appreciate your fortitude. That is something that is a dying characteristic in all generations, because a lot of people don't have fortitude. They'll be quick activists for things, and then they'll just let it die down and move on in life. So that's one thing I want to thank you for, and I want to thank you for presenting that to the audience in this show today, because you're letting people know that it's all right not to be all right with a situation when someone of authority tries to hold you down, in a sense, and make you conform to what's not right for your body, and you didn't conform. So I want to thank you, Margaret, for that wholeheartedly.
Oh, and just thank you for having me on. And aren't we all so lucky to have Jesus in our life? I
Yes, we
mean,
are.
that's where the real presence is, and none of this other malarkey.
Yes, ma'am. All right. So once again, I want to thank you for being on West Virginia and Commonplace, and I am signing off.